let's start casting. How many podcasts have you done?
This is my first one ever.
Excellent. Mine too.
Good. Will make me look pretty good then.
We'll mess this up together. Tim Hall, you've been on my radar. This is Tim Hall. Introduce your firm. The name of your firm is Morgan Hall.
Morris Hall, yes.
I always say Morgan because of that dadgum commercial with that Morgan. It's Morris Hall. You guys have been doing estate law for a long time.
Yes.
A long time. And frankly, you're my favorite outpost to send folks to because I have never heard anything but great coming back.
Well, we appreciate that.
And so I had one of your associates in here that I went to high school with, and we're buddies and had ourselves a grand conversation. So I lied at the beginning. I've done this a few times. But he spoke so highly of you, I wanted to meet you because not many folks have been practicing law as long as you have. And the law has not changed. It's archaic in its nature, not changed in a long time, right up until the last 30 years. 30 years is probably the prime of your career. You've seen the law change quite a bit. The way it's been administered, the way it's practiced, the way it's twisted, the way it's turned a little bit. And like, for example, when I first started practicing law, that was 21 years ago. It's a good stretch. It was common to see lawyers on the television and on the big billboards, but just a few years before that, you would only see them on the back of a phone book. But then the radio ads started creeping in, and so it became but even before the phone book, you couldn't even advertise as an attorney. And you lived in those days. You practiced law when you couldn't advertise.
Had a good friend who got disciplined because he simply said something on the radio about come to see me. It's hard to imagine that. In fact, as you say that, it surprises me to go back that and remember that's the way it was.
Yeah, that's the way it used to be. And I enjoy my elders. And I enjoy the knowledge that you're a walking encyclopedia.
That's why I'm here, because I'm one of your elders, right?
Well, you should be. If you're not, I mean,
I definitely am.
I need to be looking up to you. I've always enjoyed experience. I mean, you can't replace it. You can't teach it in a classroom. And so the way that you view life is a walking education, and you're imparting that to my friend who's my age, who's been practicing law the exact same amount of time that I've been in this industry, and it's fun to see that he's surrounded by wisdom and a really solid firm that you have there at Morris Hall. And I started thinking, okay, why do I like Morris Hall? You guys certainly send the best things to us a couple times a year. And most people send the cookies and whatnot, but you guys seem to be thoughtful in what you send over. But it's not very often. It's here and there. And I always thought that's pretty cool. But you guys produce a good product. If I had a nickel for everybody that's going to call me this week asking me to do something very simple in your world, let's call it a power of attorney, I'd have a lot of nickels. This very week, I would have a lot of nickels. But when someone's asking me for a power of attorney, I'm now thinking, after discussing some things with Mike, they must not have anything put together. If they don't have a power of attorney put together, they likely don't have any of their things in order, whether they be 30 years old or twice that age. They don't have anything in order. And there's probably a lot of folks out there wandering around that don't have their things in order. Something as simple as a power of attorney, which gives, let's say it's a medical power of attorney, which gives some folks that you trust decision-making if you have a medical issue. Heaven forbid, but it happens.
Unfortunately, the greater part of those who have some type of that have one that's not totally effective. In fact, with the healthcare documents, there's the healthcare power of attorney, mental health power of attorney, the HIPAA form, and the living will. So there's really 4 separate documents that people really should have. And a lot of people just have one combined in everything, which typically doesn't work very well.
You're right. They like it to be more, the longer we keep going, because we were talking earlier maybe on or off the record, we were talking how things have changed and gotten a little bit more specific and gotten a little bit more, just a little bit different in this industry of ours. But now, to make sure that but that doesn't cost a whole lot of money for somebody to go and see you guys and say, hey, I want those 4 things. So, I mean, that's not going to break most folks' bank accounts. And I think people need to kind of know that. There's circumstances where there's a lot of assets and a lot of moving parts in someone's, what somebody's accumulated throughout the years, regardless of the age. That's going to require some more elbow grease. But those 4 documents that you talk about explain, like, roughly what somebody might be looking at. Let's say a 35-year-old goes in there. They have a couple of kids, and they're just starting to get into debt in their industry, but they're looking to start climbing on out. That's the client that you have in front of you, and they need those 4 documents. What would that usually run roughly? I mean, I'm just roughly.
Typically about $750. Now, you can get documents online. They don't cost anything. They're better than nothing. However, most of those documents, most people wouldn't be happy with those documents. Hopefully you'll never need them. However, if you do, you want the best documents. And they're separate documents. For example, the living will says at some point, that's it, pull the plug. And you want to be thoughtful in that because, quite honestly, some of the healthcare providers don't want to pull the plug. They're a little concerned about their liability, and most of them are trained to keep you going as long as you can. And so you want to make sure that that's worded such that they're comfortable doing that. Then there's the healthcare power of attorney, and that's the person who makes the decision about pulling the plug. It's the one who would authorize emergency medical treatment if you couldn't do that for yourself. And a while back in Arizona, it became the agent of the healthcare power of attorney is the one who makes the decisions about the final remains. Years ago, that used to be done under the property power of attorney, but now that's under the healthcare power of attorney. And particularly essential if you're going to be cremated or do something other than simple burial. We've had clients get to the crematorium and some relative or neighbor said, I don't think they want that. They'll stop the process because obviously they can't uncremate you. But that healthcare power of attorney said, this is what's going to happen. Here's who makes the decision. That's the end of the story. And then there's the HIPAA form, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Who has the authority to get the information to make the decisions? I'll tell you a tragedy I had not too long ago. It turned out to be not as bad as it could have been, but had friends who had a son. When he was 16, he had a psychotic episode, just went off the chart. It took him years to get back. He eventually graduated from school. He was doing pretty well. They hadn't heard from him for quite a while. And they tried to call him, went by his apartment, nothing. They thought he'd probably had another episode. They went to every healthcare facility where he had been and where he might have been. Not one of them would even tell them whether or not he had been there. They went for 30 days before they knew whether he was alive or not. So that becomes a very important document. And what a lot of people don't understand is when you send your kid off to school, you give them all they need. They should have those healthcare documents because if they're over 18,
interesting,
you're not going to
get it.
You're not going to get the information if you need it. Yeah,
that's interesting. So it's very important to have even your kids, your young ones, to have these documents to where, they have backup.
Correct. Once they turn 18, you have no authority to get any information unless they have that hip reform.
What made you get into law in the first place?
My grandfather was a judge, I guess. And,
In the White Mountains also?
yes,
We got a White Mountains man.
up in Apache County.
We
yes.
are very fortunate to have that here. The guy behind the camera there, he's a snowflake fellow. And so we like the White Mountains folks around here. We're flatlanders.
Well, where I'm on and in Snowflake, we're kind of flatlanders too, but just a higher elevation.
That's probably true, isn't
It
it?
is true. And we get a lot more wind.
A
Anyway.
little bit more windy, and that pig farm typically would. Well, I don't know. Are you old enough to remember that? Excellent. That's where all the elk hung out, apparently. Well, anyway, so your uncle, you said,
My grandfather.
your grandfather.
Was a
So your
judge.
grandfather was a judge, and that intrigued you?
Well, kind of, but I never thought too much about it. I went a year to school, then I went on a mission to Argentina for a couple of years, and I really didn't decide what I was going to do until I got back. And actually, my major was English, but I decided probably like to follow his footsteps, not necessarily be a judge, but the idea of following the law appealed to
Interesting.
me and still does.
Excellent. So this is way back when? What years, more or less?
I started law school in 1970.
Okay. So 1970, a lot going on in the world in 1970.
You wouldn't remember.
No, I wasn't born just yet. No, I was coming along, but not yet. Interesting. Okay, so me and Bailey automatically have to dislike you because you went to Argentina, and we're Chileans, so we both went to Chile.
I went to Chile also.
I understand that you made up for it.
Yeah, I did.
Down the road, you made up for it. You repented, you made up for it. It's good.
All of South America, ya vale.
I love it. I love the fact that the Argentines that were in our mission, I'm sure it was the same when you were there, they had this little rift with the Chileans, and I
just
thought,
a little one.
why do you people have such a rift? It's the game of soccer. Enjoy it. I know the Argentines typically, they take all our best talent from Chile and pay them more, and they are very, very good and usually very formidable. But when I was there, we got to go to the World Cup, and boy, was that a lively event.
Absolutely. Everything shuts down.
Not one thing open.
And then you heard, go!
Yep.
For about
It
20
was so
minutes.
fun. It was a really contagious thing. I'm not a big soccer guy, but man, that was super fun to see the excitement in just about every soul's eyes rolling
absolutely.
around.
Where
And I'm
in
assuming it's the
Chile
same.
were you?
Antofagasta, same as him.
Seriously?
You're not
Way
gonna-
up north, huh?
Way up north.
Well,
Yeah, we drew the shorter stick when it comes to Chile. Chile's a gorgeous place.
amazing.
But
What?
where we went, don't think it would be considered that. It's more like our most barren desert here makes that look. Chile makes our most barren desert look like an oasis, where we went.
Had a friend up there and he said you travel 200 miles and never even see a bush
Not
or
a
weed.
leaf, a weed,
Hard to
not
believe.
anything, no color whatsoever. And it's kind of cool looking back on it. It's like, that was, yeah. Yeah, you do. You got to learn the fact that you got this water truck rolling through Centro every day, watering their dirt, making sure it's packed down. And some of those dirt floors were cleaner than any floor we've ever had in here in the United States. It's amazing how clean they can keep those dirt floors and how hard they can get them.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty cool. So, has Spanish been a big part of your practice?
It has. Well, in just daily life, I lived in Chicago, and a lot of Hispanics there, and then lived in Corpus Christi, Texas, when I was in the service.
Yeah,
Obviously,
okay.
a lot of Hispanics there. Then we served in the Azores, and it was Portuguese and very similar, and certainly appreciate the culture. And then being back here in Arizona, I've always been glad to know Spanish, and especially appreciate the people.
Oh yeah, the people are fantastic.
There's something about them.
And they're starting to ask me about wills and things of that nature also. And that's new, because that's not usually top of their hierarchy there, or their thought process. But that's fairly new. It's interesting that I'm getting a few questions here and there. So your firm services Spanish-speaking individuals?
We do.
Excellent.
I do.
You do.
Well, I'm known to speak Spanish.
Well, okay. Well, out of default, you get to do it.
Oh, I would be selfish and take them all anyway.
Well, I love it. I love it. So you get into law way back in the 70s, turn of the 60s to the 70s. Your grandfather was a judge, and you chose to. I'm assuming you served the country in the military.
I was in the Navy JAG.
Okay, so you're JAG. So, okay, dispel this or explain it to me, because I want to kind of understand this. Because the way I have it understood, and I'm not sure it's correct, so I'm going to verify this, is it's probably the coolest way to go about learning how to practice law, period. Because the way they do it is this is my understanding, could be wrong, is 1 year you're a prosecutor, the next year you're a defense attorney, 1 year you're a prosecutor, next year you defend.
Not necessarily.
Okay, so
Now, there have been some changes since then.
Okay.
And I will preface this with the saying, they used to say it, probably still do, military justice is as to justice what military music is as to music. And it wasn't the best.
That makes sense.
So when you started, you were the defense counsel. You defended everybody, and you learned to make your mistakes
on the defense side.
And they paid the price. When you got good, then they made you a prosecutor.
Interesting.
And then if you're really good at prosecuting, they make you the judge. And it's changed a lot since then. But
that makes a whole lot of sense.
But the commanding officer of a squadron, or whatever it was there, would be the one to determine what level of crime you want to be charged with. Whether it was a misdemeanor or a felony or a serious felony. And then that same person would pick the jury. There was some limit. If it was a listed person, you had to have a majority of the listed people on the thing. But he picked them, so you're going to be on the jury. And then once the jury was fine, the verdict came in, to make sure everything was fine, it was that commanding officer, never studied 1 day of law in his life, reviewed it to make sure it was all right. So things have changed since then. And when I was there, we had what was called a law center, and we had a Navy captain who was an attorney, and he supervised all of the attorneys. So really what he did was assign them to the cases, but he still didn't review the results to make sure that complied with the law or ethics.
Well, we do a lot of things that people don't like. You deal with death and the prospect of it. Day in, day out. We'll go back to your JAG days in a minute. I'm going to loop back around. So you deal with topics that people don't necessarily love to talk about, but need to talk about. And we deal with criminal stuff, and we deal with car accidents, and we deal with divorces. So people that are not happy. We're not finding people that they're happy. Not usually. We've had some exceptions to the rule where people are very incredibly positive and resilient, but still going through a rough time. Okay. That's what we do, but I've found that defense bar, or those that defend cases, might be very similar to your experience in how you just discussed the military. You kind of have your, giving it the old college try, so to speak. The way to make the most money is the most amount of numbers. And well, with that, there's always a diminishing return. You got to figure out, okay, this case is going to require this amount of time to do a quality job. As in this case, in this case, in this case. And the more you get, the more you have to jockey. And then, okay, now you got to hire somebody. And how good are they at what are they? And so on and so forth. And so I like to say that a good defense attorney is a hard worker, is a diligent individual. They're hard to find. They're hard to find out there. They are out there, but they're just hard to find. People ask me all the time, who should I hire for blah, 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 blah. And if it's not us, I'll recommend a few folks that I know will give it their all, and I respect that. You just said at the very beginning of this that somebody needs 4 things, no matter how you slice it, and that's going to be roughly $750. You're not going to be Elon Musk category in the tax bracket of Elon Musk by doing just the 4 things all day long, but that honesty and that straightforward speak, I like that. That's why I love your firm. I mean, Morris Hull is a very, I'd like to say it has character as a firm, which is very unique to me. Your associates are incredibly loyal, and they ride for the brand, and I very much enjoy that. So, do you feel like you got that idea from the military? You brought that experience from the military into private practice?
To a great extent. The difference between private practice and the military was I was forced to go into the military.
Okay.
I wasn't forced to go into private practice, and I could choose, but it was a great training ground.
So you were drafted?
Well, I was in the first lottery for Vietnam.
Got it.
The number was 203. In January, they got to 195, and I was a senior in college. My draft board contacted me and said, don't even enroll for the last semester because you're going to get drafted. And I made a Herculean effort to get accepted into a program. They had a program that if you joined them and gave them 3 or 4 years after law school, they'd let you go to law school. They didn't pay anything, but they just said you won't get drafted.
And you didn't have to pay for school.
Oh, I did.
Oh, you did.
They didn't give you anything. There were no perks other than the fact you weren't going to go to Vietnam.
You weren't going to Vietnam. You were going to law school,
And
which some people might argue. I don't know.
one jungle to the other, but I had a family and everything else, and my intent was to go to law school. And so I had to make a couple extra efforts to do that. I swore in, and 3 days later, they froze the draft at 195. I wouldn't have to go. But it was a great experience. I met some of the nicest people I've ever met, and
Awesome.
I learned a lot about what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do, and the type of attorney I wanted to be, and the type of attorney I didn't want to be.
Interesting. So when you got out of the JAG, what did you first start doing? What type of law?
We got to the second half of our service was in the Azores, Portuguese islands, about 800 miles off the coast of Portugal. The most beautiful place you can imagine. But life was really slow. And, I'd gone to the University of Chicago, and I thought I'd go back to Chicago and practice and the hustle and bustle, and my clock ran down. And I had a good friend from high school, and he was practicing in St. John's, and he invited me to come and practice with him. And I couldn't have churned up my speed fast enough to go anywhere else. And so I spent 18 years there. And
In St. John's?
Yes. Did some criminal law, and we sued people, we defended people, a lot of transactions.
So this is back in the days where there were attorneys like you that were called the general practice attorneys, kind of like a general practice doctor. You did a lot of everything.
Whatever came in the door.
Yeah.
Including domestic relations.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you're very well rounded as far as your experience goes, because anything that came through the door for 18 years, you would handle that. And then you specified. At some point, all of us were kind of a little bit. At some point, all of us. I even did the rent law thing, but they called it rent law when I started. They didn't just call it law. That's what it used to be called. Now it's rent law. Anything through the door to pay the rent.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. But it was. Everybody was trying to specify into something, and personally, I did personal injury and juggled that with criminal. And when I realized that it'd be better off to offload the personal injury stuff to those that just focused on personal injury, it took a decade for me to do that. But once I did that, I just did criminal defense, and I find we do a lot of Latino work. We do a lot of just very, very ugly things as well that a lot of other folks won't handle or won't touch. Sex cases get to be pretty rough on a family. People don't really consider the full scope of all the all the mess that particular case will create.
Yeah.
There's your very violent acts. I had a gal in my office yesterday that had shot her husband. She was unrepentant. I mean, he passed. I mean, from the shot, he killed her husband, I guess, the way he put it. But she'd already done her time. She was a very intriguing gal, and frankly, after hearing her full story and admission and all the things, and all she's trying to do is get along in life and figure out how to never go back and how to scrape some of these things off her record so she could climb the ladder in employment. It was interesting to speak with her for a bit because I kept thinking, dang, I wish I represented you 8 years ago, dear, because there's a lot of moving parts to your case that just should have been explored. Monday morning quarterback comes with territories. You've been there, I've been there, we're all going to be there again. But when you do these things, that general practice, I had the opportunity, and you probably know him. His name's Kent McKinley. I got the opportunity, and maybe you don't, to start right next door to our building here, and I was surrounded by 5 elder statesmen, 5 attorneys, and the only one that was a general practitioner, a general lawyer, was Kent McKinley. And he was, when I think of Atticus Finch, I think of him. I mean, he was incredibly level, incredibly talented at many things, writing, just pursuing a fact pattern and figuring out where your leverage is and where you're weak and so on and so forth, depending on whatever type of case he was handling. But he wouldn't touch criminal, and he wouldn't touch personal injury. He'd called personal injury not real law. I'll withhold my opinion on that. I'll withhold. But
Depends what side you're on.
It depends on which side you're on. So you ultimately, after 18 years, decided to narrow that scope to estate law.
Well, what happened, got called to go down to Chile for 3 years, and we coming back, didn't have a job, didn't have any prospects. We knew we weren't going to go back up to Apache County, and we had children down here. I had a friend who was a Superior Court judge at the time, and I called and asked if he had any ideas, and he said he had a good friend who was doing some interesting things. It was Dan Morris, who was a charter member of the American Academy of Estate Planning Attorneys, and he lined up an interview, and in about 3 nanoseconds, we knew it was a match. And so I've been doing estate planning since then. Excellent.
So it's been a long time since you've been doing estate planning, and you guys are pretty much statewide.
Correct.
I mean, that's awesome. I hear you on the radio sometimes, and I just love to tell folks to go your way because quality awaits on the other side of your door.
Well, we appreciate that.
Look, I'm related to a handful of folks that have a very large piece of the estate planning community out there, but I'm going to go ahead and withhold all that stuff and say, well, I've never referred anybody over that way. It reflects who you are. It reflects your name, whomever you send somebody to, in my opinion. And so I like to know, okay, well, this person does, this type of law really well, and I tried to hire Mike before you got him.
We're glad we beat you to it.
Well, you didn't beat me. I lost. You did not beat me.
We're glad you lost.
I lost. I think that he definitely ended up where he should have ended up, because I know the depth of him, and how bright he is, and his character is unmatchable. Good human being, and then also very bright, and so he was going to be great at whatever. But the problem I had here was not the same problem you have there. The problem I had here is, well, I could have put Mike over here. I could have put Mike over here. I could have put Mike over here. A little bit too scattered. Wherein, turn your hand to what he already had a pretty good working knowledge with, and just crank it down. He's going to be, those dots are going to be, those I's are going to be dotted, the T's are going to be crossed, and he's going to be really good with those clients. And I thought, daggum, that's a good firm. And I started really paying attention to you guys at that point on. I really enjoy watching. So I've met a couple of your associates and your daughter over the telephone and text. And she's a lovely lady as well. And for somebody to work for their dad and still like him, and, you know, that's pretty great.
That's an interesting story. There's no nepotism there at all.
No, she's talented.
Well, during COVID, I didn't go to our Phoenix office, which is our principal office, for 2 years. My wife has had a liver and a kidney transplant, and the kidney transplant was just at the first of COVID. So for 2 years, the only place we went is either the Mayo Clinic, the hospital in Phoenix, or the clinic in Scottsdale. Jeez. And that was it. And
how's she doing now?
She's, well, pretty well. We see about 10 different departments out the Mayo. We've got there a couple of times this week, but thank goodness for modern health.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hadn't been to the Phoenix office for 2 years, and when I went, I was wearing a mask, and my daughter Amy was there, and she was wearing a mask, and I didn't recognize her at first. Then I was astonished. What are you doing here? I had no idea. Well, West and Andrew's our managing partner, and West are everything, had been talking to her about joining our firm as the marketing coordinator. I had no clue at all.
None.
No, so
they just found a good.
But I was in favor.
Oh, sure. Well, she's really good at what she does.
She's done well.
Yeah. So I like to encourage folks to think ahead and to think right now as well, because you said something early on that, man, I had never really thought of. I mean, I wrote a will when I first started practicing law because somebody had asked me to write a will for them. And so I figured I'd practice on myself. And that was my first will I ever wrote, and I've written a handful since, and I probably would advise all of those people to go see your firm, to go see Morris Hall right away and redo whatever I did. Because back then there wasn't those 4 absolute necessaries. There may have been a little more than what I provided, but I mean, I just did a will and testament, kind of like what you would get offline nowadays.
Actually, you can probably get offline better than what most people would provide if you went to a firm. You know, will used to be a good thing. When I first started practicing, probate wasn't a big deal. It cost $12.50 to file the thing. Within 2 or 3 months, you could have it all resolved. Now probate takes several months. It's often a year and a half. It's expensive, but it's public. And most people don't want that. They don't want the expense. If somebody has minor children, if they have significant amount of retirement assets, if they have a business interest, if they have children from separate marriages, or over maybe $250,000, for almost every one of those, a trust makes a lot of sense rather than a will.
Sure.
So that's the people we deal with.
Well, and also not even considering that, you consider business partners, you consider entities that you might have, you consider, I mean, this list we could spend a lot of time on this list.
Oh, absolutely.
And you brought up something that I had never thought of, ever. I have a 21-year-old that you got to meet here a little bit ago that's rolling around, and why do we probably ought to have, some things on him, because he goes snowboarding in Utah and meets a tree the wrong way. We won't be able to get the information that we need for him. And he's 21. We've got 2 19-year-olds. It's like, well, I did not think of that. They're adults now. And so I would like to be able to have their information, if something were to happen or transpire. And things do happen. Lives.
Absolutely. One of the reasons we limit our practice to this is because things change. You can go on to the Attorney General's website and get documents for those. But we found that there's things that are better. We've seen about everything you can possibly imagine. We had a one of our partners had a client a neighbor who passed away. Her 92-year-old widower came over and said, I have nobody to make healthcare decisions for me. Would you do it? He said, sure. So for several months, he went to every appointment. He was there for the last illness, the death, the funeral, the burial, the whole thing. We saw where the bumps are in the road and the potholes. And so our documents for those four, the healthcare documents, are much more robust than what we'd seen before. Now you reflect back to what it used to be like with probate and the general practice. Things evolved so much, and that's why we do what we do. One of the main things about us, we belong to the American Academy of Estate Planning Attorneys.
Yeah, that's federal.
There's about 140 firms throughout the United States. There's 3 in Arizona. My partner Dan, former partner, he's retired, was one of the charter members. We have accountants and attorneys working full-time, doing all this. If we didn't belong to the academy, we probably wouldn't be practicing in this area, because of the documents, the procedures, the help that we get. If there's a change in the law, we know about it immediately. Anyhow, it's fun to do, but it's not static.
Yeah.
Any area of the law, if you don't keep up with it, the Arizona Bar recognized that. You have to have 15 hours of continuing legal education. However, that could be in basket weaving or whatever else.
Sure.
But it's exciting to be involved in something where you continue to have to grow to service your clients.
Yeah, because things change so frequently in the marketplace. And so, and we were dealing with just 5 years ago a difference of documentation that a hospital would take for somebody to be able to make decisions on behalf of somebody than just 5 years later. I mean, we're dealing with things that are different. You're talking about 4 documents that once upon a time one would have done.
Correct.
A general power of attorney would have even done once upon a time, but now you got to have a medical, and then boom, and then the HIPAA, and then so they multiply and replenish these things, and it's just super fun. And
sometimes all you can do to keep up with it all, but
well,
I
just think that it's very. So we just mentioned college age boys and girls, folks. We just mentioned newlyweds. We just mentioned those that have been, a handful of years into marriage, those that want their things that are not married taken care of and decisions made in the way that they would like. This pretty much, your services touch every aspect or every dynamic that we have in our population, in my opinion, outside of a minor child, but even those that have minor children. Where are they going to go in case you and the mom are incapacitated or no longer able to care for them? Well, that's kind of a big deal. So,
I tell clients that's the most significant decision you make. Who's going to take care of your kids?
right. I mean,
Probably the hardest.
and that's going to produce quite the argument between you and your significant other. It could anyway. I could see that coming. Me and my wife have an obvious person they're going to, which we feel really bad for them if something were to happen to us. But at the end of the day, they'd be really satisfied where they ended up. It would be the best placement for them. But if we were to die without that in place, it's like a fumble on a football field.
The court's going to make that decision, and
it might not be the decision
sometimes they get it right,
we
sometimes
want,
they
right?
don't. You never know.
Yeah, and in this situation, you would assume that, well, yep, I guess that's aptly put. Sometimes they're going to get it right, and sometimes they're going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to put that. So it's so interesting that this service that you provide is so wide. It's so broad. It touches anyone that breathes air.
Oh, we have clients from worth $100,000 to $100 million.
Sure.
And everybody's unique and they have particular circumstances, but there's a need at every level for some degree of planning.
That's got to keep it kind of fresh and kind of exciting.
It is.
I love it. I mean, it keeps you in the game, just cranking right along.
Well, and it's fun to do. People ask if I'm going to retire, and I tell them I don't like golf. I'm kind of worthless at home. I love meeting with people. What would I do better than this? It's fun.
I completely agree. I completely agree. I don't golf either because I don't have that right temperament or the time. That takes a lot of time. And I can't see hanging up the spurs. I enjoy what we do here. And so it's like, I feel like we're doing a really good service for folks. And I think that's why we look at it this way. I think we feel good about what we do. We like what we do. And I'm worthless at home too. I just learned how to cook something the other day, and but I'm not sure I should have cooked the cereal the way it came out.
Yeah. Did you learn how to clean up the pan that you ruined?
Yeah, it would have been a good move. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten caught that way. Anyway, so this is Tim Hall for everybody out there to know, and it's Morris Hall, and they're a fantastic firm statewide, and look them up on the Google. They're easy to find. Morris Hall is an easy name to remember. And Tim Hall, you can just even plug him in and it comes right on up. I want people to go see you. I want as many folks to go see you guys as can possibly hear us here. We'll get you guys a copy of this podcast that we did today, to where Amy, your very talented daughter, can do what she does with that. And at the end of the day, let's see if we can't inspire folks out there to kind of think one step ahead. Well, hold on, because you just brought up something I had never even thought of. Reed's going snowboarding literally I think in a week. And if something were to happen, and I'm not a big what if guy, and I'm sure he's going to be fine, but all right, something does happen. I'm not going to be able to find him. He goes, from this hospital, this, wherever. I'm not going to be able to find him because they can't give me that information. I had never thought of that. So how many other things have I not thought of?
A great desire to protect people and privacy and everything else and do good. We paint with such a broad brush that you really almost have to be specialized in what you do and focus entirely to step with all of this. And I don't know if any lawmaker ever meant wrong when they did what they did, but sometimes they don't foresee the consequences.
Yeah, the unforeseeable result.
Yeah, and just you got to work at it, keep up with it all.
The unintended consequences really do create quite a bit of mess sometimes.
Yes, they do.
And you brought something up really early on in our conversation that just made me think, what else have I not thought of? Probably a whole lot. So I'll be sitting down with Mike again, because it's been a few years, and just to say, okay, where am I at now? But I just think everybody needs to contemplate to have those 4 at a minimum documents that you were talking about. I'm not a big fan of people doing it yourselfers. Let me give it, as far as they can get it online, they can get this, they can get that. I understand that, but I feel like that gets more people into trouble because there's so many little nuances. There's a zillion and 16 nuances, and then they end up kind of getting involved in some of their product, and then they come back to you later and say, fix this, and it's almost worse than if they would have just started from fresh and gone forward. So let me explain what I mean by this. I have a home improvement. We had a leak in our house, and I come from construction. I'm from Mesa, Arizona. I mean, I should swing a hammer, and I should be able to pour concrete, and I should be able to, build anything from the ground up. The problem is I can't. I just think I can. So I started in on the home improvement stuff, and 2 or 3 months into my efforts, I realized that I'm going to pay more money now than I would have before, given my very good efforts. Did I mention 3 or 4 months? It took those that knew what they were doing about 2 weeks, and it would have taken him about 2 or 3 days if I didn't have anything to do with it. So I kind of think, yeah, the internet's wonderful, and education out there is wonderful, but given the gravity of what you deal with and how you are dealing with, I never thought my teenage, I still consider him a teenager. He's not, he's 21, but I've never thought my 19-year-old, I'm not going to be able to find him in a what if scenario. And I've got 2 of those floating around. And I've got a 16-year-old floating around. Now, she's different, but not when she turns 18. I never thought of that. So what else have I not thought of? And so if everybody out there in the universe can understand that I'm not thinking of these things, and I probably should be, but I never thought of that.
Well, and the thing is, we all have some unique circumstances. And the problem we have with a lot of this is you don't know if it's going to work or not until it's time.
Right.
And if it's not right, it's too late. Like your home improvement, fortunately somebody could take that, but if the building had caved down because of what you did, or at some time it just expired like your life does, and you don't know when that's going to be,
right?
You got to be prepared.
So basically what you're saying is you can only figure out if the boat is going to float when you put it in the water. And you know how to build boats.
And in our business, we know eventually that boat's going to sink because everybody's going to die. And hopefully you won't become incapacitated, but everybody's going to die.
This just gets getting better and better. You're right, though.
It's true.
It just is what it is.
You got to plan for it.
So let's all contemplate where we're at. This touches everyone, and everybody consider Morris Hall. I think they're the best option, again, statewide. And it's been a pleasure meeting you.
Well, it's delightful.
I love it.